I'm going to rank every state in the US based on how fun I think it would be to visit every single one of their state parks. And if you're thinking, that's kind of a really weird and specific criteria, you must not have seen my video where I visited and ranked every state park in Montana, so this is kind of like maybe like a little follow-up to that. So, check that out if you haven't already. For this tier list, I'm gonna be basically going on a quick search of what their state parks look like, what I kind of know about the natural landscape of the state, how many state parks there are, and like the size of the states. Not based on very thorough research, it's just kind of more of a vibe. First up is Alabama. Alabama's got about 20 state parks, so, pretty manageable. Plus, you get a couple different, pretty distinct biomes. You got a little bit of like that Gulf Coast down there, plus some hills in the north. Hopefully there's like at least one cave or something. Alabama is actually like one of the most biodiverse states in the US. I think it's a little underrated in terms of nature. Maybe we'll go like B. I think it seems good. Next up, Alaska. Alaska, based on nature alone, should probably get S, but here's the thing. There's probably like great logistical difficulty in trying to get to all of the state parks, because Alaska is rather remote and whatnot. So I think I might bump it down to A just for like, I'm not thinking about getting to the state because like once you're already in Alaska, it's already going to be a difficult task to reach all of them, I'm assuming. So just for like the sheer difficulty, I'm going to put Alaska in A. Next up, Arizona. Arizona I think is going to be an S. Now that might seem a little crazy since I put Alaska in A, but pretty large state. I'm a big fan of the American Southwest, one of my favorite areas in terms of nature. Plus just like, there's so many cool things to see in Arizona. But yeah, Arizona has 31, which is a pretty good manageable number. Feels like a decent amount for the size of the state. Maybe a little bit lacking, I don't know. I'm a big fan of Southern Utah, and Arizona is just south of Southern Utah, so hope it'll be pretty fun. I don't know if maybe it's not S, I don't know. Maybe like an A. Next up, Arkansas. Now, while Arkansas does have some unique areas, like it does have the Ozarks, for example, I just think that it feels very one note. I don't describe it. Pretty small state, but it's got like over 50 state parks. And I think that could be a bit repetitive in terms of like the uniqueness. That's another thing I'm going to be considering. Would each state park feel unique, or would it just be kind of a slog of like, okay, this feels like this, and they've got the Ozarks, I know that much, so maybe they should go up to a B for that. I don't know, 50 in such a small state seems like it could be a slog. Next up, California. I think California I'm going to put an S tier just for the sheer variety of nature it has. Like California I think is one of the most naturally beautiful states. In case it isn't obvious, I'm a big fan of mountains and deserts. I also enjoy the coast, so 80 state parks, it's one of the largest states, so that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, the one downside I would say is just like, the sheer size of California and how many there are could definitely become like a slog to get through. So that's really the only downside I could see, but like, I don't know. California coast looks amazing, I'm sure you got stuff in all the biomes of California. Next up, Colorado. Colorado, ooh. High A, if not S. I don't know. The Colorado Rockies are amazing, some of the best mountains in the US. But then you also have like a few in the plains. But also, I don't know, the plains can sometimes have some hidden gems in terms of nature, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like a lot of time once you enter the plains, kind of like, well, yeah, I kind of get the idea. But I see like mountains as more unique, but Colorado, has a lot of mountains. I think it's definitely S or high A. 42 seems like a good amount, I feel like there's just a lot more variety in mountains than there is in like plains. I would hope that there's a lot of cool ones in the mountains. If not, then ugh. Next up, Connecticut. Connecticut is going in F tier. You wanna know why? Guess how many state parks they have. They have 106. Connecticut, the third smallest state, it's in the top 10 for the highest number of state parks. And it's Connecticut. I'm sorry, I'm trying to visit all of them. Be like, what are you doing, man? I'm sure they're all like a nice little park. They've all got a nice little forest and a stream and a pond or something. And I'm sure there's a couple on the coast. Well, probably more than a couple if you have 106, but they all just look very similar. I don't think you're gonna get much diversity in Connecticut. I think this would just be like mind-numbing to try and do, be like, oh yeah, here's forest number 45. For that reason, I think Connecticut is gonna go at the bottom here. Delaware has a much more reasonable number of parks at 17. Plus, in proportion to Connecticut, more coastline. However, outside of that, Delaware isn't really a state known for its nature. It's pretty flat. Kind of dull, but it does go above Connecticut for having a manageable number. I feel like you could knock that out in a weekend. I think it'd be a cool little thing to do. Next up, Florida. Florida's got a lot, but they're also a bigger state. But also, it's a lot, Florida gets shit on a lot for being like the sweaty armpit of the US. But you've got some amazing nature you find in Florida that's unlike anywhere else in the US. Unlike anywhere else in the contiguous US, I should say. You know, you got like the Everglades and just like a lot of cool swampy areas. You know, I really enjoyed visiting the Yucatan while I went there, and I think this is probably the closest place in the US to the Yucatan. I think it's B, you know, I think it'd be a little exhausting going through all of them. Probably want to do it not in the summer. I say as if this is ever a thing I would do. But yeah, they have over 100. So I'm sure there's a lot of repetition in there. Honestly, I might put it below Alabama because, you know, I'm sure I've got amazing stuff, you know, beaches and swamp and whatnot. Next up is Georgia. Georgia, I think I'm going to put about next to Alabama. You know, they are bordering. They both have hills. They've got the Appalachians, and they've also got the coastline. Very similar vibe to Alabama, I feel like, kind of in terms of nature. You know, they both have hills in the north, coast in the south, and I think I'm going to put them in a similar place. They have a little bit more state parks, though, so I'd hope to see maybe a bit more variety. But I don't know, though, because maybe Alabama's is like, since Alabama has half, maybe it's like a bit more punctual, you know? All right, next up, Hawaii. I think I got put in S tier. Tropical volcano islands. As far as the 50 states go, there's nothing else like Hawaii. The only downside I could really see is just like trying to figure out getting between the islands. But I'm pretty sure it's pretty easy to traverse between the islands, so I'm definitely gonna put an S. Next up is Idaho. Idaho, I feel like gets kind of underrated in terms of nature, you know? It kind of gets looked over when talking about a lot of the Rocky Mountain states. And I think that's due to the fact that like people from Idaho kind of, not to generalize too much, no other state has made me feel like I'm about to get the shit kicked out of me in a gas station. I'll put it that way. But in terms of nature, I'd say they're severely underrated. You know, they have things like the sliver of Yellowstone, but also, you know, a lot of cool stuff nearby that. And you have Craters of the Moon, you know, a national monument, not a state park. You know, you got some of that deserty vibe in the south, and then like in the north, you have a bit more of a Pacific Northwest vibe, and then in the middle, you got the Sawtooth. So I think there'd be a lot of cool things to check out with Idaho state parks. Plus 24 seems like a really manageable number of state parks. So yeah, I think a solid B tier, maybe a low A. Honestly, I think 24 might be a bit low. You know, I think they could probably use a bit more. Illinois, I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna spark a lot of debate with the Midwestern states, because Illinois, well, I'm sure a lot of the state parks aren't just gonna be like a cornfield, because, you know, but that is most of Illinois' landscape, kind of what I associate with. I mean, you do have a little bit of lakeshore with Lake Michigan there. Okay, they have 46, which isn't too bad, honestly. I don't know, maybe a low C tier? Because I'm sure the state parks themselves would actually be would kind of be more hidden gems among Illinois. So I think I'm gonna put them in C tier. I don't think it's gonna be anything crazy like you would find in the Rockies. Honestly, I don't know. Idaho, I think I'm gonna put in low A tier. I'm sure it's not gonna be like the pinnacle of Idaho nature, but like, you know, Idaho's got some great stuff. I feel pretty similar about Indiana as I do to Illinois. You know, Midwestern states, sure there's some hidden gems. But they have a little bit less, so I think it'd be a bit more manageable. Yeah, I feel pretty similarly about these two. Iowa, on the other hand, has 75. That's like too many. I know there's some cool like hilly areas, but I don't think anything it has could really compare to something you'd find in like a Rocky Mountain state or something, you know? There's just so many. I feel like that's a real burnout, especially maybe you feel differently about this than I do. Kansas has 24, which is a pretty manageable number. I definitely think it gets ahead of Iowa and Delaware then. Plus, the Great Plains, there's some crazy things you can find in the Great Plains, so I definitely think it definitely is at least in high D tier. You know, Kansas, kind of one of the most boring states in terms of natural beauty. Honestly, you'll put it at low C, just because, like, I know you can find some cool rock formations in the prairie, so gonna put it there. Next up, Kentucky. Kentucky has a decent amount. They're like in the 30s somewhere, so I think that's a pretty reasonable number of state parks. Pretty hilly, a lot of lakes. If they have a cave state park, which I know there's a lot of caves in the Appalachians, I don't know. I might put it above Alabama, just because Kentucky hills seem pretty cool. But I don't know. You're missing out on the coast, you know? You're missing a little bit of diversity with Kentucky. I feel like the coast is really helping these two out. Next up, Maine. I think Maine, gonna go high B here. Maybe low A, but at least high B. They've got some of the coolest mountains east of the Mississippi, plus like right on the coast. Maine coast looks really cool. You know, also has Baxter State Park, one of the few state parks I've heard of outside of Montana. I'm gonna put it high B. Next up, Louisiana. Louisiana, I think the swamp's kind of cool, the bayou, but a little bit one note, so I'm gonna put it in C tier. You know, I think that'd be kind of a lot of what the natural beauty would be, is a lot of just like kind of swamp land, you know? Maryland, you'd have a little bit of hilliness plus some coast. 54 in a small state, it's kind of a lot, you know? I feel like you'd see a lot of repetition of like what you end up actually seeing. Probably above Delaware, since you have like some hills in the west. A lot of burnout, I think. Massachusetts, I don't know, you have Cape Cod coast looks pretty cool. And then you got some more hills, a little bit more inland. I definitely think, I don't know, maybe like a high C, maybe like a middle C. I don't know. Massachusetts also has 51. That's just a lot. A lot for a small state. Kind of feels similar about it to Maryland, you know? I feel like Cape Cod looks pretty cool. And that's kind of pushing it up to like middle C, I'd say. Michigan has a lot. I don't know, but I'm sure it has a lot in the UP. Like Michigan has like in the 70s in terms of state parks, which is kind of crazy. I don't know. The UP looks like such a cool place. But yeah, I assume there's a lot of stuff up there, but just like this one, a lot of burnout, I could see it. Feel similarly about Minnesota. I guess I didn't mention it with Michigan. Like usually the further north you go, I feel like in these two states, you have like more, I don't know, forest and stuff. In terms of natural beauty, both Minnesota and Michigan are known for it being a bit more beautiful in the north. But I'm sure there's some cool stuff in the plains, but just because it has a more manageable number, I think I'm gonna rank it above Michigan here. Plus you get some cool stuff along the Mississippi River. Next up, Mississippi. Since it's between Louisiana and Alabama, I think I'm gonna put it between Louisiana and Alabama. I think that's be kind of the scenery. I'm gonna put like a high C tier. They have a manageable number of parks. But I think it'd be a little bit more varied than Louisiana Swamp, but I don't think it'd be as cool as Alabama. I don't know. These are all just based on vibes and street view, essentially. Missouri, you have the Ozarks. It's a little bit bigger. I think I'm gonna put it above Arkansas just because, you know, a little bit bigger. I feel like there's a little bit more different vibes than Arkansas. You know, I feel like there's a couple more environments, a little bit more spread out, so I feel like you'd see more diversity, but I don't know. Montana's weird, right? It's hard to rank because it's the only one I've actually done, you know? Like, I win visit all the state parks. And honestly, here's the thing, because, like, there's some amazing, like, hidden cool places I didn't know about beforehand. There's also some real duds, which I'm sure is true for a lot of states. I'm sure anytime I look up state parks of insert state, that I'm usually seeing, like, the highlights and the cool ones and the ones everyone wants to go to. Because, you know, the thing with Montana is, like, there's definitely some cool ones, like all the ones on Flathead Lake, and then there's like Fish Creek and Lewis and Clark Caverns. You know, some amazing stuff, really. But then you also have just some duds that's just like an old fort. I mean, it has a cool view, but yeah. Montana's large size, it does make it really cool because, you know, there's a lot of diversity in landscape, I would say. Maybe you don't think there's as much a difference between like these mountains and these mountains, but yeah. Also the plains stuff, there's definitely some crazy stuff out in the plains. 54 state parks, I think is a good number for the size of Montana. Its large size makes it a little bit exhausting a trip, but it's still really cool. And I'm probably very biased since, you know, Montana's my home state and whatnot. And some of these state parks I do have like fond memories of outside of just visiting them all for the video. I think it's A tier. I definitely don't think it's S. You know, as biased as I am, I'm not gonna put it in S, man. Like, here's the thing. A lot of states, their coolest nature is like in national parks. Here's that, you know, no state park in Montana could compare to a glacier or a Yellowstone. Like, a lot of them were kind of like, huh. But also a lot of them, I knew of just like cooler spots just like near my house. So now Nebraska's interesting because it has 8. 8 is a very manageable number of state parks, you know, being a neat little road trip. However, on the other hand, it's Nebraska. Nebraska is probably one of the only ones I've looked through all of them, and none of them seem that interesting, so it gets high D for having a low number. It would be pretty easy to do, but also Nebraska. I'm sorry, Nebraska. Nevada, I think, you know, another underrated state in terms of nature. I'm a big fan of the Great Basin landscape. You know, just like large sprawling valleys with these mountain chains rising out of the ground. And then you get some cool, like really deserty stuff near Las Vegas. And then like more just kind of traditional mountain stuff near the California border with like Tahoe. I hope the state parks would be a nice representation of those. This is one state where I think there's like, yeah, there's definitely, I feel like too little state parks, you know. The state parks are very sparse between them, which, you know, makes sense because Nevada is very sparse outside of Las Vegas. So I think, I don't know, maybe high B. I don't know. I like Nevada. It's a very funky state in terms of nature. New Hampshire has 40. Now, while it does have some pretty cool mountains, you know, like Mount Washington, you know, one of the tallest peaks east of the Mississippi. I don't know, maybe if that's a state park, then it could definitely go higher, but like, I definitely think it's below Maine, because that's 40, and New Hampshire just isn't that big, so I think you get a lot of like, just kind of repetition. It does have a little bit of coast, but like, I feel like, you know, kind of hilly. I don't know. Just for so many in a small area, maybe low B. For how small it is, I feel like New Jersey is kind of naturally diverse. You have like kind of that coastal vibe, but then you also have the Pine Barrens, and you have more hills in the north. So I don't know, you have like a few different biomes, which I think is pretty cool for a small state. Plus 28 is a much more reasonable number for state parks in a lot of these smaller states. Maybe like a high C there. I think that's good. Okay, New Mexico is another one in terms of the West that's I think is really underrated. I mean, not really. I don't know. I've never been to New Mexico. It's one of the few states west of the Mississippi that I've never been to. I think it gets kind of overlooked, especially in the Four Corners state. I feel like it is the fourth corner, if that makes sense. I'm about to be here like, oh, New Mexico seems super underrated, and then rank it below all the other states in the same area. Yeah. Sorry. It's feel like 35 state parks, a bit on the low end for how large New Mexico is. New Mexico's definitely got some really cool high altitude stuff, and then it's got a little bit of desert. I do enjoy the desert. I'm sure you see a little bit more than Nevada, so I'm gonna put New Mexico ahead of Nevada. New York has the most state parks of any state, I believe. 170 goddamn 7. That's too many. That's too many for any state. For that to be in New York? Okay. Okay, dude. It's bigger than a lot of the states around it. However, in terms of the grand scheme of things, it's kind of a middle-sized state. I spent like a lower middle. There's probably some cool stuff in beaches on Long Island. And, you know, you definitely have like near the Adirondacks, I'm sure there's some really cool stuff. But then I looked it up. Turns out Adirondack Park is just one large park. So I don't even think it's a state park. That kind of eliminates like the coolest part of New York in terms of natural beauty, I think. I mean, you do have some of the Great Lakes and Finger Lakes. I'm sure there's a lot of cool stuff on the lakes, but just from the sheer number of stuff, I gotta put it in D tier, because like there's no way all of it can be that interesting. And you know, like keep in mind, I'm sure they're fine, but like if you're thinking about visiting all of them, you're gonna like you gotta get exhausted, right? There's no way that each one is wholly unique and interesting. I mean, sure, Montana has a lot of state parks, but the thing is, each one feels pretty unique for the most part. I mean, there are a couple of like, okay, these are basically right next to each other and they're the exact same place, but they each feel like, yeah, they have their own vibe. There's no way you can get that in New York. Okay, next up, North Carolina, which has 34, which seems like a good number for a state that size, you know. I feel like you get a lot of diversity. You have like the Great Smoky Mountains and adjacent stuff in the west, and then like the coast to the east. I'm sure there's some cool stuff in between, so I think it's gonna be the highest of the southeastern states. I think there'd be a lot of cool stuff to see in North Carolina. Next up, North Dakota, which has 13 state parks, which is not the most, but honestly might be a little bit of a blessing for North Dakota, since North Dakota is not known for its nature. I've said a couple times there could be hidden gems in the prairies. I don't know. I don't think there's gonna be anything that's like, whoa, this completely changes my worldview of North Dakota. Ohio, I don't know. They have a national park, so there's got to be some cool stuff in Ohio. I know they have like kind of more hills to the south, so you got that going for you. Feels similar to Indiana and Illinois, but I'm gonna put it a bit higher. How many state parks do they have though? Probably like 50. Actually, I've looked, they have 74 state parks. That is just a lot. You get into the fatigue there. All right, next up, Oklahoma's got 38. Pretty reasonable number for how large it is, I think. I know Oklahoma's got some cool stuff with the Wichita Mountains. I don't know if there'd be any state parks in those. And there's also some hills in the southeast. I don't know, I definitely think it goes above the rest of the plain states just for having, I know it has a little bit of texture to it, you know? I just can't see it being like that interesting. Who knows though? I could be very wrong. Oregon, I think I'm gonna put it straight to S tier. I think it's gonna be my #1 state. If I were to pick any state that I could visit all the state parks of, not worrying about money or time it takes to get there, I think I would pick Oregon, because it has the California thing where you've got like the desert, the mountains, the coast, and all the forests and all the cool stuff and whatnot. But it's also a smaller state and has a much more manageable number, which I think puts it ahead of California. Plus, like, you know, I'm just a big fan of the Oregon coast. One of my favorite regions of the US. Pennsylvania, 110. You don't need that many. Plus, you don't even, like, I'm putting it below New York because I know they've got hills and they've got the Poconos, and that looks neat. That's so much fatigue. You know, you got the fatigue thing. I feel like New York have a little bit more variety, but just 110, man. Rhode Island, I'm gonna put ahead of Delaware. Maybe put top of D tier, because Rhode Island's got a manageable number. It's got 15. It's a small state. Seems pretty easy. Plus, you get a little bit of coast, so I don't think you did too fatigued. Maybe you could do it in a nice weekend or something. I don't know. But honestly, I don't think it'd be anything that interesting. So I think C makes sense. South Carolina, gonna be, I don't know. Get a nice coast, you got some hills in the north. This is what I say about a lot of the southeastern states. I don't know, I'm gonna put it out there. It's got 37, might get a little fatigued for how small the state is, but you know, I do know there's some different terrain in South Carolina, so I'm gonna put it at B. South Dakota is getting saved from D tier by the fact that it has the Black Hills, which I'm sure would be the highlight, so I'm gonna put it in high C because I like the Black Hills. And it also has Badlands. I'm sure there's like some miniature Badlands. I would hope there's at least one miniature Badlands as a state park. If not, then dang, dude. Next up, Tennessee. They got mountains, feel kind of similarly about to Kentucky, so I'm gonna put them next to each other. Texas is interesting because it's another one where just like the sheer feat of trying to visit all of them would be exhausting. You know, like 76 is a lot, but Texas is also a big state, so I'm sure you'd see a lot of diversity in that. You know, the Panhandle is a different vibe than the, whatever the hell you call this thing. I don't remember. The other Panhandle? I can't remember what this is, but you know, which has a different vibe than like the coast, which has a different vibe than like Dallas area. So like, I mean, there's like gotta be a lot of diversity in terms of natural beauty, but like, I don't know, man. Eastern Texas looks all right in terms of natural areas, but I think, yeah, I don't know, you probably run into a lot of fatigue here, but I think there'd be a lot of cool highlights as well. So I think solidly in B for, you know, high diversity, but also just huge feat, huge task. Utah's going to S. I love Utah. Utah's maybe one of my favorite states in terms of natural beauty. Yes, I'm gonna put it ahead of Colorado. Sorry. Southern Utah, amazing. On its own, might bring it up to S. It probably puts it up into A with Arizona. But then you have the Wasatch Front, more of like a traditional Rockies vibe up in the north. So I think that is what pushes it into S tier. Like, you know, you have the amazing mountains of the north, plus the amazing crazy rock formations and deserts of the south. Yeah, I love Utah in terms of nature. This is a definite S pick for me. Next up, Vermont. They have 59. That's fatigue right there. That is fatigue. Vermont looks pretty cool, but like, I don't know. There's no way everything can be that interesting in Vermont. I think you definitely get fatigued after seeing so much in such a small area. Honestly, I'm just gonna keep dragging it down because 59, that's a lot. I think it'd be really exhausting. Anyways, Virginia, you know, you got some cool mountains in the west, coast to the east. What more can I say? Washington, I think, it could be another S tier if it weren't for the fact that it has 110, man. Like, Washington, very cool state. I really want to go to Olympic some point, you know, and there's definitely some cool stuff, you know, in the east and then in between. Very beautiful, but like just the sheer number, I don't know. I think it's gotta go low A. Okay, Washington is smaller than like all the other states in A, but I think has more than all of them combined. If I were, let me do some mental math. That's not true, but it has a lot. Next up, West Virginia. You know, I've heard it's pretty underrated in terms of nature. It does look kind of cool with all the hills and whatnot, but kind of one note. Yeah. Next up, Wisconsin. I feel like pretty similar vibe to Minnesota, Michigan. 48's kind of a bit much for the size. I don't know. I feel pretty similar about like the upper Midwest. We're gonna put a low B. Wyoming has the benefit of having a few number. However, all of Wyoming's cool nature is taken up by national parks and other stuff. Like, I was looking through their state parks, so they only have 11. That's a pretty reasonable number. However, probably a little low, you know, considering Wyoming is very large. Because like, okay, Wyoming has Yellowstone and the Tetons and Devil's Tower and all these cool things. Like, it also just has a lot of just scrub. And it looks like the state parks are kind of interspersed throughout. You know, I don't think you get anything crazy, so I don't know. Maybe low B, just for the low number. And like, I'm sure there's some highlights in there. There's obviously cool stuff in Wyoming that isn't like a national park or monument. Yellowstone is kind of the coolest part of Wyoming, or the Tetons, you know, and like the nearby areas. And I don't know if there's any state parks in there. And I realize that that'll do it. That's my tier list. I'm gonna now take a look through, see if there's anything I kind of really want to rearrange. I don't know. Do I really want to put Wyoming beneath like Georgia? But I don't know. I was looking through them and none of the state parks seemed that interesting. That's one of the few I did look through because it's like, realistically, if I were to visit any state and see all their state parks, Wyoming is probably one of the ones I would do, since Wyoming is close by and there's like a little number of them. I could probably knock it out in a couple days. I don't know. They just didn't seem, nothing really stood out to me, but maybe I'd be wrong. Maybe someday, years in the future, I will come back to this list with real life experience. That's the goal, at least. So If you want to see that goal ever come true, like and subscribe. Check out the video where I visit every state park in Montana. I think it's maybe my favorite video I've made ever. I know it's rather long, but I think it's one of the coolest things I've made. It's a very large project and it meant a lot to me, and I am kind of making this video just to be like, yo, check that out. But I would really appreciate if you did check it out if you haven't seen it already. And if you have seen it, I do appreciate that. Speaking of promoting my own stuff, the links to the Art Ocean Man social medias are in the description. And I'll see y'all for the next time I visit every state park in Wyoming. Yeah, who knows. See y'all later.